Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Cinemaholics. This is another bonus episode with yours truly, Will Ashton. John Negroni is not here, but thankfully I am once again joined by a returning guest. You know him best from comic book news, and he's been on the show plenty of times before. It's our good friend, Charlie Ridgely. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, man. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm probably going to be better after we talk about this little canine classic that we're going to
I think
discuss.
Certainly maybe at some point, potentially.
You think?
I mean, I don't know what classic means in the terms of dog movies, but
right.
You know.
I mean, I was thinking about that earlier this week, that there was a time where we would just get a movie starring a dog or starring like a monkey, and that would just be the centerpiece of the film. Like, what's the plot? A monkey plays baseball. What more do you want? Or a monkey is on a skateboard. Or in this case, like a dog plays basketball. A dog plays football. A dog goes into space with his puppies. It's just like that was
it just evolves.
A plot of a film. Yeah. And now we got a movie called Dog, which is the feature directorial debut of both Channing Tatum and his longtime partner, creative partner, Reed Carolyn, who is, I think, best known for writing the screenplay and producing Magic Mike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he wrote both of them.
At least the first one. Yeah, he wrote both of them. They've been teasing together getting into directing. I know for a little while they were both attached to direct an adaptation of Matthew Quick's Forgive Me, Leonard Peacock. And they've been flirting with the idea of directing for a while, but this movie, far as I can tell,
and I believe Reed was writing Gambit too. When Channing was attached to that, I think Reed was involved in that as well.
And because there was a part of me that wanted to theorize that this movie was about the failed Gambit film, but I couldn't really cohesively tie a thesis together for that. But I will say that this film, even though it came together sort of sporadically, at least as far as like what I can tell, like it sort of wasn't really publicized about much. Like I didn't really even hear about it until I think they finished filming. That was the first time I remember hearing any sort of buzz. The announcement that a
trailer was coming was, I think, the very first time I had any. And that's in our line of work. It's really rare to not hear about a movie until that late into the game. Like there was that. What is apparently, I've not seen it, but what is apparently very, very terrible Liam Neeson movie that came out recently that I already...
Blacklight?
Yeah. I did not, until like the week before that movie came out, I did not know that movie existed. And that's so rare when I'm like, my job is to know what movies are coming out all the time. And so, it was kind of refreshing with Dog where, a trailer came out and it wasn't something that I've been thinking about for a long time or known for a long time. It was kind of nice to say, oh, here's a new thing that I get to like learn about as it's actually happening. Like I used to, like, oh, I went to a theater and saw a trailer and had no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so before we really get into the movie itself, I kind of wanted to talk to you about Channing Tatum, just as far as his career is concerned, because he has such a sort of wild trajectory in terms of his fame. Obviously he has like this sort of working class upbringing where he starts off as like a male performer, like a male dancer, and then an exotic dancer at the same time, and then he finds his way into the first Step Up film as the star, and that kind of leads into other films like The Vow and a few others where he's sort of treated as like this big hunk of meat. Like no one, I remember there was a time where really critics at least didn't take him seriously at all, but he was becoming a bit of a box office draw. I don't know if it was just because of his good looks or because of his slide dancing or what, but he was really bringing in people to the theater, at least in a modest fashion. But critically, at least, it felt like it was around like 2012 when people actually started taking him somewhat seriously. And ironically,
because really, he was built to be this, the classic leading man. That's what they were really forcing him into, kind of this bubble of like, we're going to put you as this hot romantic lead, or we're going to put in very unfunny movies, or we're going to put you as a very serious action star. You had G.I. Joe was a real, a movie that should have been really fun and funny. He had all these he was very typecast into these parts. And it really wasn't until Steven Soderbergh and Phil Lord and Chris Miller that people started realizing who Channing Tatum really was. And that was, I think the first Magic Mike was 2011, right? and then
20 that was 2012.
and then 21 Jump Street was right around then too.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think 2012 was like the 1-2 punch of 21 Jump Street and Magic Mike, where 21 Jump Street came out, I want to say in like around this time of year, now like a decade ago, where people had fairly low expectations for it. Like obviously people liked Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, but no one was really excited or interested in a feature-length R-rated comedy version of 21 Jump Street, and it surpassed all these expectations.
It honestly felt like at that time Jonah Hill was the biggest draw of that movie.
Yeah,
a few years after Superbad, he'd been on a run. Like he was the most appealing part of that.
Right. But yeah, I mean, even though that is obviously a reboot of a famous 80s TV show, there was something that felt very fresh and vibrant. I think a large part of it was because people were taking Channing Tatum seriously as a talent. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, like he held his own in this good comedy. It was like, oh, he seriously has some comedy chops. Like these other movies tried to tap that in, but that was the first one that really seemed to capture that. And then with Magic Mike as a starring vehicle, that was just like, okay, like, it's autobiographical in some respects, but it's really like he's working with a top class filmmaker like Steven Soderbergh. He's really putting his talents to good use, and he's showing his charisma and how he can really handle his own as a screen presence. And that's when we obviously get to like Foxcatcher and some of the other movies, like even the supporting parts in like Hateful Eight and Hail Caesar a couple years after, where it's like he is not only becoming a box office draw, but something of a critical darling at the same time. Possibly one of our more exciting leading men, or at least one of our up and coming talents.
He's very much, I mean, they're very, very different, but to me, he feels a lot like Andrew Garfield in that they are very unique. Like there's a very unique draw to them. I don't think they're anything alike in terms of what they do, but they have qualities about them that I can't quite describe, and I can't really attribute to other people either. You know, they're the kind of guys that sometimes a role comes along and it's like, oh, only that guy could have done it. Only that guy. You know, I watched Under the Silver Lake, and I'm like, that was such an Andrew Garfield movie and performance. And you know, when I watch some of these now with Channing Tatum, like he's a much deeper and more layered and more thoughtful person and performer than anyone ever wanted to give him credit for before Soderbergh and Lord and Miller. You know, no one ever wanted to acknowledge that there's this guy. And when you look at his role specifically, when you look at Magic Mike, and when you look at what's coming in The Lost City of D, when you look at Dogs, and when you look at 22 Jump Street, he's had this really interesting like trajectory where he is kind of dismantling a lot of the stereotypes that were built around him, and like a lot of these masculine stereotypes, and not necessarily always toxic masculinity, but you look at what Hollywood has portrayed men to be at times, and what, you know, what we expect from men that, you know, that look like him, what we expect from these built hot dudes that are in these roles. And he's kind of dismantled that. He's really made an impact in terms of like, you know, healthy male like friendships. You know, you look at Magic Mike XXL, which is like one of the great underrated sequels of our time. And then you look at,
it's so good,
you know, what he does with Jonah Hill in 21 and 22 Jump Street. And like, he is this really thoughtful guy in these movies that is really good at breaking down a lot of these, you know, insecurities that come with masculinity. And I watched a lot of Channing Tatum movies. I mean, I watched the last two both Magic Mikes and 21 Jump Street, like right before seeing Dog, like all within a week. And it was like, wow, this is it's really cool to see how he, you know, went from being typecast to finding his niche and really doing an excellent job at it. And like when I watch a trailer for something like The Lost City, it's like, oh man, that looks like another just knockout in this same realm. You know, it looks like a guy who has specifically been told he's only good for his body, and he's trying so desperately to be worth something else. You know, and it just, and I think Dog is just another layer to that. And I think Dog might be more Magic Mike than it is 21 Jump Street. But it still finds those layers in Channing. And he's really been an interesting figure to watch grow, because he's one of those, you know, we're about the same age. And I think that people in our generation, you know, he's one of the true, like, our generation stars that we've watched grow. You know, I know he's a bit older than us, but we all watched Step Up, and we watched him immediately become a star, and we've watched this trajectory over the last 20 years or so. Not even 20, I mean 15-ish.
Like that,
but
yeah.
It's one of the few that I can really remember, like, tracking an arc. You know, that has had ups and downs and done different things, and because you didn't just need to be a film nerd to know who he was. Like Garfield was in a lot of stuff that maybe wasn't as mainstream for a while, and then he did Spider-Man, and he did some more indie stuff. Whereas Channing Tatum has kind of been right in the public eye. All of his films have been kind of really publicized because of the way he was painted initially, and so we've all had to pay attention to him. And I really appreciate how he's taken that and owned that and turned it into something positive and turned it into something really layered and fun and different from what a lot of other guys are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I never really thought to compare him with Andrew Garfield, but I do agree that he is an actor that strikes me like I think people had certain expectations or saw him and it's like, oh, he's just this big dumb lunk, basically like a sentient block of wood that's just kind of walking around. And even going back, like I don't know if you saw a Guide to Recognizing Your Saints.
Oh, that was around loved the same that year. Movie. I mean, I might not. It might not have held hold up now. I haven't watched it in probably 10 years.
I haven't watched it in a while.
But I liked it a lot when it came out. And I remember liking him in it.
Right. But that was like even going back before 21 Jump Street, I just remember, people were willing to dismiss him when he was, in She's the Man and Step Up. But you could see in that film, like, okay, there's clearly something to this guy. If he can really hone it in, he can really figure it out, he will become a true talent. And there are other films I think showcase that, but it wasn't really fully formed, like Stop Loss, and I think he was in Public Enemies, right? I think that was like a while back.
I think so. But he was in one of those gangster era. I think it was Public Enemies,
right? Yeah, but I mean, I do think it was like the early 2010s where it really started to come into form for him. But what's fascinating was that after he had a pretty successful run, like leading up, I mean, he had a couple like clunkers. Like I haven't seen it since it came out, but I know Jupiter Ascending, at least commercially, wasn't a big hit. I know it's gotten a bit of a reevaluation, so I don't want to speak.
Well, that's more of a general, Wachowski. Like,
right.
We all look more fondly on the Wachowskis as time goes on. I'm not going to weigh on Jupiter Ascending either way because that's just an easy way to make people angry, and so I'm not going to say anything about Jupiter Ascending positively or negatively. I'm just going to shut up about it.
But I mean, he had like Hail Caesar, which is obviously he's fantastic in that film. He's one of the standouts in the second Kingsman movie, and he's really solid in Logan Lucky. But around that time,
I forgot about Logan Lucky too. I love Logan Lucky.
He's really good. Yeah. That's probably one of his better performances.
And he and Driver are really good together.
Yeah. But outside of some voice performances around this time, that was like 2017, he started to kind of fade out of the public light. Like he had Smallfoot in the second Lego movie, and last year he had that Netflix movie I never saw, but I heard was pretty awful, called America, the Motion Picture. But he was, really as a screen presence moving away because there was some stuff going on in his personal life where he was getting divorced to his ex-wife's name?
Jenna Dewan.
Jenna Dewan?
Mm-hmm.
Dewan, yeah.
Yeah, they had started and Step Up together.
Right. Yeah. And he seemed to be taking the time to kind of focus on himself, be there as a father because they have a young child together. And what I find so fascinating about this film is that it's kind of his like return to the spotlight. Obviously, like you said, there is The Lost City coming up, I believe next month. Mm-hmm. But this is like the one where it's like, okay, Channing Tatum is not only coming back, but he is directing or co-directing this film. He's producing it. And he's, really kind of ushering in the second phase of his career,
and he's the only one on the poster too. This isn't like a it's not going with Sandra Bullock and Brad Pitt and kind of easing into like I'm one of the people in this movie. Like it's Channing Tatum and a dog, and that's it. This is a welcome back in the sense of like you're going to this movie specifically for me. So if people don't show up, like what does that say? Or people do show up, what does that say? Because it truly is all on his shoulders, especially as a director.
Yeah, it's a truly un film, the Channing Tatum. But yeah, I know. I think Brett Rodriguez was also a co-writer on the film. But this film, from what I can tell, and this is where I'm going to get a little murky because I know there's some stuff in his personal life that I just don't know. I have to assume, but I know the story was based on his own relationship with a dog who I believe was also named Lulu. And I know it didn't come together in the same way. Obviously, he's not Army Ranger or anything like that, but he did have sort of like a fostering relationship with this dog. And it was around the same time that his marriage was falling apart and he was focusing on himself. And he used this sort of narrative to form a cinematic kind of like return. and to kind of like focus on where he wants to be in this like divorced dad era of his. And that's where I find this movie fascinating, is like you said, like he is one of, at a time where we really don't have that many traditional movie stars for the millennial age. Like we have maybe Jennifer Lawrence and now Michael B. Jordan and a few others, but we really we're really down to only a select few. I guess Tom Holland as well.
And that's more of a Gen Z thing. Like he's kind of coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. But, he is one of our last remaining movie stars as far as like a traditional sense. And like you said, he has like this sort of like up and coming working class sort of mentality. And now he's coming into this, which I harken back to sort of like a mix between his sensibilities working with Steven Soderbergh, and also it's like an early sort of Clint Eastwood, any which way with loose sort of mentality, where it's just residing on his star power, but he's obviously with an animal. And it's just like, if you don't have a star like Channing Tatum at the start of this, you kind of wonder, like, what are we really doing here?
Without a Channing Tatum, it's very much like a Netflix movie, like it's... It's a streaming title, which there's nothing wrong. Grant Gustin has a dog movie coming out on Netflix next month.
Does he?
But Grant Gustin's not Channing Tatum, and that movie also looks to be a more traditional, sad, sappy dog movie. But that's kind of the era. Like you need a star like Channing Tatum. I mean, Milo Ventimiglia, who we all I think like quite a bit, had a dog movie that came out a couple of years ago, or maybe last year. I truly don't know what time means anymore. And I feel like no one talked about it or saw much of it, and I don't remember really hearing anything about it. So I think it does speak to Channing Tatum as a persona, as the kind of person who can like promote this kind of movie. And Clint Eastwood's a great example. I didn't even think about Clint Eastwood. I was trying to think back at just kind of straight up dog movies and things like that, but I didn't even put together. That was a big part of Clint Eastwood's career. We'd like to think of the Westerns and stuff, but that, Any Which Way But Loose, those movies were really a huge part of his trajectory.
Yeah, certainly as far as like, I mean, I actually haven't seen Any Which Way But Loose, but from what I can tell, like that mix of like, broad animal-related comedy, but also like serious moments of pathos that really just challenges Clint Eastwood to really carry the screen with his animal co-star. But as far as the plot of this film, it's pretty broad as far as just like it's focusing on this Army Ranger who's at this point of his life where he's down. He can't really get back into the Army, but he doesn't really know how to move forward. He's having trouble getting his benefits, and he finds a way to get back into it, albeit in a somewhat unconventional fashion, where he is going to be transporting this canine Army Ranger to a funeral in the Pacific Coast. I
think he's going from the tip of Oregon or up into Washington, all the way down to New Mexico, Arizona, somewhere down there.
Yeah, and it has, if you can pardon the pun, sort of like this kind of Shaggy Dog narrative where, it's just him and the canine kind of getting to antics going through Portland, and him, Channing Tatum's character trying to get laid, but the dog obviously prevents that.
It's very much a road trip buddy comedy.
Yeah,
just exactly. With the dog.
But that's where I wanted to turn to you. I know one of the weird things about this movie is that it didn't really have a lot of build up. So when it was coming out, like I wasn't 100% sure if this was going to be good or bad, just because the response from MGM was weirdly kind of quiet. But I know, talking to a friend of our show, Corey Woodruff, he was the one that was kind of assuring me like, oh, this is actually pretty good, because you had seen it and you were speaking positive on it. But I wanted to hear more from you. What was like you said, you kind of came into this movie not really knowing much about it, but like leading up to the press screening, what was your feelings going towards it, and how did you feel walking out of the screening?
Well, so I really, like we've talked about, I watched it strictly because of Channing Tatum. I had been kind of on a kick lately. I'd seen the trailer for The Lost City, and I kind of, I went back, and I had never seen Magic Mike XSL. I'd seen the first one, never seen the second one, and I'm so glad I righted that wrong, because that movie is incredible. And I, to watch the 21 Jump Street movies, and I was just kind of on a Channing kick, and I was like, I'm getting really excited about this dog movie, just because of more Channing, and I haven't seen him in a while, and like I talked about earlier, there was this kind of dismantling of a lot of stereotype with him that I was really into, and I really liked how layered he has been in his characters and his character choice, because it seems like he's been much more selective in this second stage of his career, he's chosen his projects much more carefully, and that's been really neat. And he really had an involvement in this and a passion for this. So I went in not expecting a lot, but expecting to enjoy it, just based on what I've seen from Channing. But also, like, I can't remember a dog. There's Air Bud like comedies, like the outright outlandish comedies, but outside of those, I can't remember any like serious-ish dog movie that really resonated with me much, because it's all very much the same. There's going to be these dogs, and this dog is going to be with a person, and it's going to be sad and sappy, and they're going to build a bond, and there's the stereotype that the dog's going to die, and they were very adamant in the marketing for dog at the end of the trailers. It'd be like, don't worry, the dog doesn't die. Will be like the last thing in the trailers. And I saw a quote from Channing that, like, his big thing when taking on this movie, his like one demand was, we will not kill the dog. If the dog has to die, I'm not making the movie. Like, I will not allow that to happen in the movie as long as I'm attached to it. That was his one big, like, have to have. And so, I kind of anticipated something that would just, if you watch the trailers, it just looks like a very funny buddy cop movie. And that's kind of what I went in anticipating. And I got a little more than that. This had a lot more emotion to it than I expected. And not in, what I worried would happen is I would go in and I'd be sold on this buddy road trip comedy, and then it would be just another, like, sappy guy bonds with dog type of thing. But so many of those movies are like, about a human or about a dog needing a human, and the human might need the dog emotionally, but it's all about reliance, kind of one way. Either way it goes. And this was very much about a bond between two equals and two beings that genuinely needed each other in the same way. And, both gave and both took. And this was one that, a lot of these, like the dog movies, when it's in action, like it's in a war or a terrible time in history or whatever, like, a lot of these dog films have this kind of narrative that the dog and the person are experiencing like this awful trauma together, and that's what brings them together. That's what bonds them. And the dog like saves the person, or the person saves the dog, and it's always this kind of this trauma thing. But in this movie, they both experienced the worst thing in their life already. They've both been through war. They both have PTSD. She's been shot multiple times, and so is he. He has this brain injury. They've both been through their worst things already. And so in each other, they don't find like a savior. They do in a sense, but they don't find someone to physically save their life. They find someone to find themselves after that. They find someone else who can understand and who can love them for who they are in a time when they're trying to recover and trying to find themselves, and not trying to, physically save their own life. They're trying to get back on the horse and find a way to keep living after a horrible trauma. And that really resonated with me. I haven't seen that in a movie like this before. The two of them having this equal stakes in this relationship. It's something we don't talk a lot about, and it's still kind of, it's weird to say sometimes, but like dog actors or animal actors, but this is really like a profound performance. 3 different dogs play Lulu in this movie, and they use them all very wisely, and they really bring an emotion through the animal, not just like, oh, the dog's sad, or we're all going to feel bad because the dog's upset. It's like, no, there was a lot of acting from these dogs that brought that character to life in a way that really resonated with Channing Tatum's character, and that we could watch that happen. We could see it happen. It wasn't just here's a big action of sacrifice, or here's a big moment of clarity. It was a road trip, and they built this trust and this love and this connection over the course of it. And so by the time we get to the end, if you go into the movie right now, not having seen it, how it's going to end. If the dog doesn't die, how the movie's going to end. They're going to ride off into the sunset together as pals, not liking each other at the beginning. I don't think that's a secret to anybody. Like, that's, what's coming. But in this film, it all felt really earned. You got there in a very natural way, in a very fun way, and a very dramatic way, a way that made you feel things. And and you were glad that it happened, and everything felt very genuine and authentic. And I think that's a very rare thing to find in this kind of animal film. It's not often that something feels this real or feels this authentic.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I found so interesting and fascinating about the film is something you highlighted, which is there's this common perception with a movie like this where you're going to see Channing Tatum kind of go through the expected arc where he is either stuck in the mud about something or he's like, like this like hard ass alpha male sort of guy, and he has to learn to loosen up and become more in touch with his sensitive side because of this dog companion. And he does have a sort of expected arc. It's not traditionally that, but it is like he kind of has to learn to like let go of his own insecurities and become in tune with himself and learn to kind of care for this canine. But what I find fascinating is the thing you're highlighting, which is that not only do we get an arc for his character, Lulu also has this sort of arc. It's not like this mentality where it's just like he is just learning about himself and becoming a better person because of the dog. Like the dog is learning to trust herself, and she is also learning to, have some acceptance, understand that like she doesn't have to resist human companionship. And that is a element, like you said, this kind of duality that I would not expect from a movie like this. It gives it more depth and maturity than a traditional narrative like this would traditionally have. And it doesn't really do anything that I think, like you said, you wouldn't really expect. It does play into a lot of expected tropes. It does kind of go for the broad swings that you expect, but there is ultimately this sort of key humanity. It is very sentimental, but in a way it doesn't feel cheap or unearned. Like it goes through all the motions, and Channing Tatum and Reed Carolyn really give a lot of moments to have sort of soft, intimate character moments with these two, this animal actor and with Tatum, and it does feel sort of like this old fashioned Hollywood sort of thing where it's just letting the characters sort of breathe in the moment and having very intimate, authentic moments. And that's really, I think, why the movie ultimately works. It does do some things I don't love, and I think it does shift in tone in ways that prevents it from feeling fully consistent. But I think that's also true of most road trip movies. Like you have to kind of have like these broad comedic moments and, the traditional serious segment, and then something kind of wacky happens again. And I don't think all those swings really work. And I think that's also Reed Carolyn and Channing Tatum kind of becoming directors and learning as they go along. But that shaggy dog quality ultimately feels more endearing than not, because they do get the things that need to work really do work. And I think by the end, like the last 20 or 30 minutes, they really nail those emotional moments in key ways. And I think that's ultimately why this is a really promising, exciting directorial debut for these two creative partners.
Yeah, and there's a couple like keys to it. At the beginning of the movie, even though the trailers and the advertisements kind of hint, confirm, hey, the dog doesn't die, the setup is like when this is over, like the dog is going to be put down because she's trainable. You can't really work with her. She's violent. And that kind of adds an emotional, even though, like it still adds that layer of like, you don't want that to happen. You want them to overcome that. And you want, that you kind of want that from Channing's character. But it really hits on the humor. It's not as like roll around funny as the trailer makes it seem. Which I'm okay with. I think that they sell it as a comedy. It's a little bit deeper than that, but it's not a pivot from that. It's a little bit more emotional or sentimental than expected. But there are some like great comedic scenes in this, and one of them coming in a sequence with Kevin Nash, who, the former wrestler who was in the Magic Mike films. He and Channing have such a great connection, and they have a really great, lovely little reunion kind of in like, I don't know, like a third of the way through this movie.
Yeah. And the setup for that is kind of wild too, because it has like this sort of weird, like thriller almost segment kind of building up.
It had a very Without a Paddle vibe to it there for a minute, where you're like, oh, this is darker than it should be.
Right. Yeah.
It kind of seems like he's going to get killed by some rando, and then it's like, oh, it's not as bad as it looks.
Yeah, and then we get Jane Addams, who I don't think I've seen a movie in a little while, and I think not since She Dies Tomorrow back in 2020. And she's also very good. I was kind of bummed we didn't get to see more of her, but I do agree. I think that segment is probably one of my personal favorites, and one of the ones where it seems like they're kind of taking a broad swing, but ultimately I think it plays out in a really interesting and intriguing way. And I would actually like to see these two directors do a thriller later down the line, because that segment does have some kind of real suspense to it, and it plays out also in some fun, broadly dark comedic moments. And then it's an interesting segment of the film for sure.
Yeah, and like you said, it's kind of tonally inconsistent, because you have the scene before that, which was like the sequence. When you're in a road trip, there's the different set pieces you move between, and the one before that was the one in Portland where he was trying to get laid, and that didn't, or it was right after that, but they were back to back, those two.
Yeah.
And that
the Portland segment, and that was probably
it was really weak. And during that segment, like, there were some good jokes, and I think Channing held his own, but I was kind of like, I don't know about this. But then the way they handled the guy, like, trying to, save Lulu, and that not really, this activist not really being an activist, just kind of being a butthole. And, you had, like, that Portland thing was really interesting, because they had a lot of these moments where they could have just dove it into Channing being the tough, rugged army man and all these, like, granola kids in Portland. And they hinted at that, but they never went into it and to make him into, like, a full, turd about it. They just kind of like, well, this is different. I don't love it. This isn't what I'm like. But it never takes a stance of like, oh, these kids are crazy and weird and I don't like them. It was all very like, things are evolving and I'm kind of caught behind. I'm a little behind. But then, you get later into a set piece like the one with Ethan Suplee, which is, along with the Kevin Nash part, I think the strongest element of the movie, or the strongest like sidebar in the movie, where he has, he has the brother of Lulu, and he is an ex military veteran, or he's a military veteran as well, and he has been going through some things, but he's kind of bonded with his dog, and Channing seeing like the other side of where he's at. It again, very, very tonally different from the Kevin Nash stuff, but they both worked equally as well. And I think if maybe a more experienced director could have woven those together a little better. But for two people who are doing this for the very first time, I think they did a really adequate or better job putting them together, the connective tissue. But those set pieces individually, I think, are all done very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think this movie is fairly economical in a way that feels true to the styles of both Steven Soderbergh and Clint Eastwood, assuming Clint Eastwood was an influence on the film. But like you said, it does seem like they allow for quite a bit of experimentation, at least with a narrative, where, like, even though they are following a broadly traditional storyline, they are kind of having little moments, like little nuggets in between, where they can kind of play with tone and style. And I don't think that does sort of damage the consistency of the film, but also allows for a lot of the more interesting segments to come to life. And even though I don't think that makes the film quite as successful overall, it does allow, I think, for Channing Tatum and Reed Carolyn to really experiment with what they want to be as filmmakers. And if we're looking at this like a first step film, it seems like they're really going to be doing a lot of interesting things as filmmakers later on, and it does allow for some really interesting tonal and narrative shifts that I don't know if they're going to be where they want to go, but it seems like, okay, like, we have this narrative where we can do something like this. Why don't we just try it and see what happens? And yeah, it's kind of exciting to see from Channing Tatum for sure.
And it really, like, when you watch it, it's one of those movies you can get a sense of, like, they weren't going out to try and make the greatest film of all time. Like, they were having a really good time, and not in a way of they're just like, oh, let's screw around and let's have fun. Whatever happens. Like, no, they were very intentional with what they were doing, but they allowed things to be fun when they needed to be. They allowed things like let's try something, and if we enjoy it, and we'll use it. And you could really tell that Channing was having a good time with these dogs and with this setup and making a movie with his friend. It had a very old school, not quite indie feel, but a very, just underground, enjoyable, like we're in this because we enjoy it and not for any other reason. And like, we're going to do something that we really love. What are the two filmmakers? Again, very, very different movies, not tonally, not at all there, but the guys who just made Something in the Dirt.
Oh yeah.
Or not Something in the Dirt. Something in the Dirt. At Sundance, they're directing some Moon Knight episodes and some Loki episodes, and they did a Synchronic and Endless. I can't remember their names.
Yeah. You're talking about Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead.
Just because their Sundance movie was very fresh in my mind. Those are two guys that you can tell are just making something they want to make and having a real blast with it. And that's what I got from Reed and Channing making this movie. Like they're just, again, very different kind of movie with a different kind of budget, really. But they were just having a good time, and they were doing something that they really believed in. And I think that goes a long, long way sometimes, especially in a movie like this, where all you have really to sell it, because it's not a complicated plot. You have a dog and you have charisma. And if you're having a good time and you're enjoying yourself, that charisma comes through. And I think it does that in waves in this movie. And I really appreciate that about it. It was something that I think a lot of people might have overlooked going in, but the reviews, I was really glad to see that I wasn't alone. I kind of thought after that, I was like, oh, I really like that. And I kind of sat around, I was like, I wonder if I'm in the minority here. Like, are people just going to look at this? But it seems like a lot of people really enjoyed it, and the box office stood up to it. For a low budget movie like this to do what, 18 million in its debut weekend.
And I believe the budget was 15 million, so not counting marketing costs.
So to essentially make back your money in a weekend, like that's all you can ask for a movie like this. And that's, I'm glad to see people responding to it, because I do think, like I said at the very top of this, I think that shows a belief in Channing Tatum, which I think we could have debated before this. Like, hey, how do people feel about Channing Tatum? Like, I know how people in our space now feel about him. There's been this kind of, reckoning where, kind of like what was with the Wachowskis, where we all love Channing. A lot of people in the film industry are really like pro Channing. But how does the general public, how does the general audience feel about him now? And I think this kind of has said, like, they're willing to go see a dog movie, in February with just Channing Tatum in it. There's no other big, there are some other, Kevin Nash and Ethan Suplee and Bill Burr. Like, there are some recognizable faces, but there's not another star in this movie. It's Channing and a dog, and they're showing up for it. And that, I think that says a lot. Especially, in times when the box office really isn't back to normal, that says a lot.
Yeah. And I get the sense though that, even though, they are making a crowd pleasing sort of film, it doesn't seem like Reed Carolyn and Channing Tatum are really too concerned with whether this is a huge hit or not. I think they wanted to make something that was clearly very personal. Like, there is a segment in the film, without giving too much away, that seems to be very directly lift from Channing Tatum's own life and his own personal situation. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like they're dwelling on that. Like, it's done in such a way where it's just like, if you know Channing Tatum's story, like, this is clearly what this is about. But the way that shot, it's like most of that dramatic urgency is happening behind a closed door, and we see it from the dog's perspective, kind of fascinatingly. And it's just like, this is all you really need to know. Like, there's stuff going on here, and I'm having some personal trouble, but at the end of the day, it's just him kind of working through his thing, both in a sort of therapeutic way with this film, but at the same time making just a kind of feel good buddy road trip movie with a dog. And it's a lot of different things at once, but it's simple, but it's also, kind of an interesting footnote in Channing Tatum's ongoing career. And I'm glad he made it. It's definitely kind of refreshing to see at a time where it feels like such personal films like this are becoming more and more of a rarity. Or a lot of them are going to
be on streaming. Like, I'm a fan of what streaming services are doing. Like, I appreciate them, but I also love going to a theater and seeing a movie. And I don't want movies like this to completely leave theaters, and I appreciate that Dog is kind of giving those movies a bit of a chance, kind of in the same way that, like Uncharted is helping, obviously that's an IP, but it's not a superhero. It's not a Marvel. It's not a DC. It's not a Star Wars. It's, there are movies like that that are like, hey, they're giving us some hope to build on for something else, moving forward. And I hope Lost City does the same thing. Before we as we're getting to our closing thoughts, other thing I want to say about Channing in this movie that I really recognize that I've never seen another movie like this. His interaction with the dog is so funny because it's so real and rare. Like, he doesn't feel like he's doing lines when he's talking, because most movies, him talking to the dog, it doesn't feel like awkward, as someone who has a dog and talks to a dog all the time. This felt like a regular person talking to it, or a real person talking to a real dog. It was all very authentic, and that was really Channing kind of carrying that and not making it feel like a delivery or like a setup. It was just, hey, I'm gonna have a conversation with this animal and it's going to be fun. And that's really rare, and I think that helps really take it further.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I wanted to say to wrap up with our thoughts is I'm pretty grateful at this point for what MGM is able to do as far as the studio. They have this, they have Licorice Pizza, and they seem to be really focusing outside of obviously the James Bond franchise, like doing stuff that is more star driven and more kind of like a return to like what people would expect from MGM at an earlier time. And I don't know, I haven't really checked in to see how Licorice Pizza is doing, and obviously MGM got recently bought out by Amazon, so I don't know how long that business model is going to follow through, but it is refreshing that a studio like MGM saw a movie like this, saw the commercial talent and potential in this, and just like, yeah, we're just going to give this a big theatrical rollout and just hope people show up. And I think it's just like we said, it's just refreshing to see that, especially from a big studio like MGM. But as we're wrapping up, have you heard about the box office game that we've been doing?
I have not.
Okay, so of late, we've been playing the box office game, which is where our guests, which would be you, would guess both the critic and audience score. I don't know if you've checked in on both. I know you said you have a review on Rotten Tomatoes for this film, but
I actually don't for this movie. I just went and saw this one for myself.
All right.
So I don't have a review up on this.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay. And so I know that the reviews are positive, but I do not remember the critic and audience scores.
All right. Well, if you have a guess, what do you think the critic score is for this film?
Critic score feels like an 83.
All right. You're pretty close. It is 78.
Okay.
And do you want to guess the audience score?
Audience score, I'll go 79.
You're actually a little bit off on that. It's 90 at the moment.
Oh, great. That's exciting.
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, I wasn't 100% sure either what the cinema score was going to be, because I figured audiences would like it, but I didn't know to what extent they were going to be like, yeah, like, it's nice for what it is. Can you guess what the cinema score is?
Cinema score is weird because it's like if you get like a C, it's the worst movie ever. Cinema score is an A-.
Yeah, you
nice.
got that one right in the head. Yes, cinema score is an A-. And then I'm also going to look up. We used to do sometimes the Letterboxd score, which is always very sort of random because that could be anybody reviewing.
Yeah.
I guess that's true of Rotten Tomatoes as well. But
the audience is very different. The people that get on Letterboxd are not the people getting on Rotten Tomatoes most of the time.
Yeah. So I will say, I mean, for what I've seen, at least, I haven't seen anyone really go hard against this film yet. It seems like it's like literally getting mad at a puppy. It's just like, who's really going to be like 1 star or like, ugh.
Yeah, because again, there's nothing mean about it. There's nothing mean-spirited about it. There's nothing like, it's not a hurtful movie. I would guess Letterboxd is probably a 3.3.
You're pretty close. It is 3.1.
Okay. Yeah.
Which is lower than I anticipated.
Yeah, I figured it'd be in the threes.
Yeah.
I would have guessed mid 3, but it's...
Yeah, I would have. Yeah. I probably would have said the exact same thing that you did, either 3.4 or 3.5. But yeah, that's our review of Dog. And do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I guess I just I encourage you, if you've listened to any of this or you're checking it out and you haven't seen Dog. I mean, there's not really it's not nothing much to spoil. It's not a big reveal movie. There's not 3 different Channing Tatums that are going to pop in from the multiverse. Like there's nothing to spoil in this movie. So you can listen to this without seeing it, but you should go see it. I think it's a really lovely little film, and I'm excited for a home release for this because there's a bunch of stuff coming out. I don't know if I'm gonna have a chance to go to theater and like see it again with with Batman and Lost City and I still haven't seen Uncharted. Like there's a lot of things coming out. But I am excited when this comes out, for home release, to check it out again. So if you get an opportunity to go to the theater and see this movie, I think it is definitely it's an hour 40. It's a real breezy movie. Yeah. It's a real great, afternoon sit in a theater. I highly recommend checking it out if you have the opportunity.
Yeah, it's like a nice little sort of detox type of film. Like if you want to get away from some of the blockbusters and the awards movies, it's just a nice little movie with Channing Tatum and a dog. So
we have had much worse February movies over the years.
Absolutely.
Much worse.
Yeah. So there you go.